Hi, and welcome to the Westeros.org video review for the penultimate episode of Season 6, The Battle of the Bastards. And this being episode 9, it is of course the traditional big episode with some big spectacle going on, and that's certainly true this time as well. What is a little bit surprising is perhaps that it is not entirely focused on one place. It is not just the north, but it involves Meereen as well. In terms of spoilers for the books, it's getting harder and harder to predict this, and I think that what we're seeing here is obviously something of their version of the battles of ice and fire that were supposed to have begun towards the end of A Dance with Dragons, but were moved to the next novel. But the circumstances are quite different. I mean, the circumstances in Meereen are quite different. The circumstances in the north with this type of battle and who are going to be involved are also quite different. There may be some spoilers in terms of who lives and who dies, but I don't think there are any unexpected spoilers to be had from this episode, to be honest. We'll start off with the action in Meereen, and I'll start off with the good stuff, because there is some good stuff in this episode, and a lot of it has to do with the production values and the way that they put together these battles. I mean, it looks incredibly impressive. First, we see Meereen under attack from sea, though I do have some quibbles with the length of some of those, shots being fired towards Meereen, what exactly they are supposed to be using that are on ships. When you're using, trebuchets and things, a solid ground that doesn't move and move backwards under resistance might be a good idea, but, it looks pretty good. And then, of course, we get some absolutely amazing dragon action. I do love the dragons. Seeing them realized has been one of the highlights of the show all along and continues to be one of the highlights. Drogon coming in and landing right next to Dany, that was pretty awesome. Although I do wonder why Emilia Clarke seemed to be wearing quite so much makeup in that scene. It looked weirdly kind of dullish or something, but anyway. She gets on, flies away, and this looks better than it did in Daznak's pit, but she really does need some kind of harness or saddle. Staying on like that, and it doesn't look very comfortable, and staying on when the dragon is maneuvering and flapping those very powerful wings seems a bit dodgy. And we know that dragon riders are supposed to have that, and she really should have started thinking about some way of holding on, some sort of grip or something at least. Then we have, all three dragons in action all at once. I'm not sure why the other two didn't actually break out at an earlier point. It seems to be pretty easy for them, but, there they go, and they're all out flying, and it looks quite spectacular, and you can understand why the attacking forces would be rather cowed by that sort of display. The other part of the battle, it's a very small part, is that, they have the Dothraki attacking, and it's a bit weird how they've decided to set up that for some reason there are some, loyalists to Dany who are outside the gates of Meereen being butchered by some, attacking forces and Sons of the Harpy, and there's maybe 30 people all in total, and the whole Dothraki horde sweeps in to kill the attackers. Might qualify as a bit of overkill, to be honest. But overall, the battle sequences and the way they set that up looks quite good, and I'm pretty pleased with how that came out, and I'm really pleased with the dragons, and I do like to see those in action. The problem is that both the Meereen section and the North section hinges on the spectacular. They know that fans are going to love this. They know that the visuals and the actual storytelling behind it, well, that's where we have some problems. So the character interactions in this episode, I think that's where I have a lot of problems. It has to do with the way that, they don't let characters necessarily end up in these situations in a very organic fashion, and then they act the way they need to act to get the outcomes that they want to have. We have the initial confrontation between Dany and Tyrion. You know, she has just returned and wondered what Tyrion has done with her city. And Tyrion is not too fond of the plans that she puts forward, what she's going to be doing, you know, slaughter everybody and you know, burn their cities to the ground and all that. So he's being, you know, Saint Tyrion in this instance, and talks about how that's very bad, and you know, Aerys was going to do the same to King's Landing, and she lets herself be persuaded by this. And I find this is just very false, the way that they interact. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel natural, and it didn't gel at all for me. And there are so many problems with this conversation that they have. I mean, yes, there's a sort of logical backstory problems of, they have, for example, had Jaime tell Tyrion about the wildfire under King's Landing. This is something that Jaime from the Bows would never have done, because he was just too proud and, you know, peevish about the whole, okay, they're calling me the Kingslayer, I'm not going to tell them that I basically saved the whole city. He's not telling anyone about that. But apparently, Show Jaime has been blabbing about this to, at least to Tyrion and God knows who else, and they sure love bringing up this whole wildfire situation right now, and where it's, you know, buried all over the city, and then talking about burning cities. So yeah, I think they're laying on something pretty thick here. And then Tyrion has no problems. I mean, at this point, he has to know what Dany's rough plans are for, you know, coming to Westeros. That involves bringing a Dothraki horde. He doesn't want her to go off and burn the other two slaver cities, because it would kill a lot of innocents. What exactly does he think letting loose a Dothraki horde on Westeros will accomplish? Yes, when she gave her speech to the Dothraki, she didn't necessarily mention, you know, the whole raping and pillaging part, but she did mention, you know, killing all the men in the, you know, metal suits and tearing down their castles. Does she really think the Dothraki are going to stop at that? Well, if she does, she's really, really stupid, and then she's, you know, Tyrion is going along and being really, really stupid as well. So it's entirely possible that that's how they're seeing it. And she's going to come to Westeros and unleash the Dothraki, and it's like, oh, shit, they're raping and pillaging too. What am I going to do now? And then we have Tyrion, when he's interacting with, in particular, Theon, when Theon and Jorah, you know, all of a sudden, you know, they're in Meereen, they're ready, they're presenting their fleet to Dany. And he is being really pissy with Theon about the dwarf jokes from, you know, 5-6 years ago. So he's, you know, perfectly happy to talk Dany out of murdering people, but he's gonna hold on to those grudges to Theon, and they kind of play it up as really ominous, like, okay, this is going to, you know, put a serious wrench in the negotiations with the Ironborn. It's just an excuse for Tyrion to bring up dwarf jokes and sort of be, you know, sarcastic and funny, basically, and it doesn't serve any other point. And then, in the talk with Yara and Theon about what they're offering and, you know, the 100 ships they're bringing, Tyrion says that there's more than 100 ships in the Iron Fleet. Except the other episode with the Kingsmoot and such, they made it sound as if the Iron Fleet was just being invented. When Euron says, you know, except I am going to be the one to build the Iron Fleet. There's no consistency here. It doesn't make sense. It's just stupid and sloppy to do these sort of things. It kind of, you know, you get annoyed when these sort of things disturb the interactions, and then, yeah, you know, you get, I guess it's, you know, Yara's delivery of the line to Dany about, you know, not demanding anything, but I'm up for anything. Haha, okay, she's a lesbian or bisexual or whatever. She's happy to hook up with Dany. It's just a little, I think, overplayed from Emilia Clarke in Dany's reactions. She seems to be awfully amused by that. And they kind of get all very sort of girly bondy right away. I'm not really sure about that. But the bad part from Dany for me is where she finishes off talking about how, you know, we all had, evil fathers who left the world a worse place than they found it. We're not going to do that. We're going to leave the world a better place. Back again to the whole, I'm going to break the wheel and I'm going to, redo Westerosi society. Never mind, again, that I am going to be bringing a Dothraki horde to Westeros. I'm not sure how that fits into the whole making the world a better place, but I guess we'll see, next season what sort of plans they have for that. But the character interactions leave a lot to be desired. Given the episode title, The Battle of the Bastards, Winterfell is obviously the central piece of action, and there's certainly no expense spared to make this a huge spectacle as well. And for the most part, it is quite a convincing spectacle with some really good battle scenes. In an interview with the director, and then also inside the episode and behind the scenes material, it was clear that they had first looked at Agincourt as inspiration, and then they moved to looking at Cannae, in particular for the pressed together Stark forces towards the end, where they can't even lift their weapons and be able to fight their way out because they're being pushed together so tightly. So they do some interesting, unusual shots. I particularly like the bit where Jon has raced forward and the Bolton cavalry is coming at him and he's standing there with his sword, and then his forces come up behind him and you get the clash of cavalry right around him. The idea that he would actually survive that, but obviously he's got plot armor at this point and manages to get through it. But it looks really impressive. A lot of the fighting maybe gets a little too chaotic when you've got the cavalry riding around clashing with each other, but it looks convincing. They used quite a lot of actual horses, but then obviously CGI horses for the ones that needed to fall, get injured, and do too dangerous things. It's always nice to know that they're being careful these days. That wasn't the case with older movies and such, but it looked convincing anyway. They've gotten to the point where they can make these things look quite convincing. It does get a little problematic at points where you've got these. They pile up the bodies massively. That's probably an inspiration from Agincourt, but it gets a little ridiculous. Like, who's climbing up to the piles of these bodies to die on top of them all the time? If they had an obstacle that they were fighting over or trying to get past, then you'd see this sort of pile of bodies building up. But here, they have a big battlefield. There's not really any particular point that they need to be at, and yet people keep dying in a pile. Obviously, it looks impressive, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the sort of defining moment where the Knights of the Vale ride in, well, there are story problems here, which I will get to in the next section, and the actual visuals, unfortunately, they have a good budget, and yes, but it can't hold a candle to scenes like, Helm's Deep, the charge coming with the Meereen coming down to led by Gandalf riding down that slope. That's amazing. The music's a lot better. Also, Pelennor Field, the charges there. It's good for a TV budget, I think. They make it look a little too easy with the cavalry cutting through the mass of men ringed around the Stark forces. Horses don't just cut through men like butter. If they run into things, they kind of have problems moving forward and so on. But battle-wise, it's impressive. It is a big set piece. It's is it as good or better than previous battles? Well, again, I have to admit that, like I've said in some previous years, I'm not like a huge battle scene aficionado. I guess I like this one better than the Battle for the Wall, which had some more sort of ridiculous moments, perhaps, that they added in for effect. Blackwater is probably still more impressive, all considered. But there are some nice, unusual shots here from sort of the chaos on the ground, rather than just relying on aerial shots. So I do think that that's nice that they went that way. Just as with Meereen, Winterfell, the battle here, has problems in terms of the story and the character interactions. I think it's even more obvious here that there are characters forced into these situations and forced to make decisions that just don't make sense to get the particular outcomes that they want. It's most obvious when we're looking at Jon and Sansa and their interactions. We're getting an awful lot of whining and combativeness from Sansa, and she's doing it in a way, again, they're trying to keep this tension up between her and Jon, and they're also keeping it, quiet, or she's keeping quiet, that she has, Littlefinger's army in her, pocket to pull out whenever, or maybe she's got it somewhere else to pull out whenever. But it's, Jon and, they got the meeting, the battle planning. It's not like Jon, for example, he's not asking Tormund and Davos to contribute their opinions. They are offering their opinions. And Sansa is standing in the background looking annoyed that she's not being included. But she's at the meeting. We see later that, Melisandre opted not to be there because she doesn't know anything about it. Sansa is there. She could have offered her opinions just like anyone else. But no, she doesn't know anything about battles. She just knows that she knows Ramsay, so Jon will make a mistake. Fine, but what are you expecting Jon to do when you're not offering him anything concrete to go on? Warning him is fine, but you can't be upset with him that he's not, you should have offered those opinions in the meeting, and you should be trying to work with him rather than just whining about it. And then when she says that, oh, well, if you'd asked me earlier, I would have told you to wait until we have more men. And Jon, well, when are we going to have more men? And she's kind of looking aside and like, oh yeah, that army, well, I'm not going to tell him about it. Why are you not going to tell him about Littlefinger's army? Oh, right, so that you can have a setup where you think all is lost and then the army comes out. Except, of course, no one who's watching is really going to think that is the case, are they? Because you did write to Littlefinger. People saw that. So they have to be waiting for Littlefinger to come in. It's very unlikely that they're going to have him come in too late. That's just not how they're building the story together. So it's false tension just to have that, Sansa saves the day moment, when Sansa could probably have done a better job of not getting people killed by volunteering this information to Jon and allowing them to make the battle plans accordingly. Yes, of course, they have Jon acting stupid by having him, ride off to try and rescue Rickon, which is exactly what Ramsay wanted, even though that was the one point that, Sansa did tell him that he should have listened to. We're not going to get Rickon back alive. Write him off. That's the one good point that she made that Jon should have listened to. And then, of course, everyone else froze in their forces after Jon to rescue him. Well, maybe Sansa should have been there so that they could, see that there's another commander, that we don't necessarily have to run off and rescue Jon. We can just as well be fighting for Sansa instead of going in and abandoning all our plans just to rescue Jon. It doesn't make sense. It makes for a lot of stupid people. And they leave out things that, could have been useful in the battle. Like, again, obviously, it's budget. We can only have dead direwolves these days, but Ghost is awfully absent. You got silly things like, those random people burning on crosses, supposed to terrify people, I guess. There's, no indication of who they are or anything, so it's just a visual that doesn't really do much. And, speaking of terror and fear, one of the things that they make a point of is that Ramsay is holding his forces together with fear. They have Jon, he challenges Ramsay to single combat and then says that, well, are your men going to want to fight for you if they don't want to fight, if you don't want to fight for them? in the meeting after Jon says that Ramsay's men don't really want to fight for him. If they feel the tide turning, they're, going to run off, or as soon as he can't hold them together with fear. And when it comes to it, we see nothing of this in the battle. Yes, I guess they don't really get the tide to turn until the Knights of the Vale come in, but they should have had some suggestion that people weren't really willing to fight for Ramsay. There's none of that. So having those points brought up, having Jon try for the one-on-one combat, and having this brought up in the meeting, it doesn't come to fruition at any point. And it makes sense that if Ramsay's holding together his forces mostly because they fear him, then there really should have been people breaking off, especially when he starts shooting arrows into his own men. So they wanted the battle to play out in a certain way, but they just couldn't, again, they didn't care about how they got to that certain way. So they have people saying things and setting up things that don't really need anyway, just because we want this sort of tension in the meeting. We want them to be able to argue about this point, and then we just don't follow up. Smaller things that are annoying about this episode: Davos. Davos goes out and finally finds, the burned stag and the pyre where Shireen was burned. This is a whole season after it happened, and it's clear that now it's going to be some sort of point, because he goes off when they get to Winterfell and everything's said and done. He's glaring at Melisandre and like, now's the time for a reckoning here. They really should have done more with that earlier on. The final sequence, strong. The setting up of Sansa against Ramsay, but logical problem here, potentially. She left the parley before Ramsay mentioned starving his dogs. Given that Jon is kind of sheltering Sansa to some degree, he's not going to go and tell her about that. There was no point bringing this up during the battle plans. So how does she know about this? They wanted that final scene, so of course she knows about it, even though they decided that she's going to ride off earlier. It drags down. They do good production, but they just can't keep the story together, and it's annoying when all people see is the fun visuals, and they don't think about all the big holes that you can drive a truck through, basically, in the plot. Overall, I'd have to say that this episode has excellent production values, and the show in general has excellent production values, but it becomes quite obvious here that they can really pull off epic things, and it can make it look good. Unfortunately, it is undercut by a lot of sloppy storytelling and character development. Actually, character development. What character development? In terms of eye rolls, I was a little indecisive. There's not that many. I got about 4 eye rolls, and then I'm thinking about whether Dany's "make the world a better place" speech is an eye roll or maybe a spin. I think it might actually be a little spin, because, the Dothraki really aren't going to make Westeros a better place. I'm pretty damn sure of that. And there's definitely a spin for Sansa's behavior, in particular in regards to Littlefinger and, the army in her pocket. And I do wonder where they're going with this. Surely this has to mean that Sansa is now sort of teaming up with Littlefinger and making some sort of, play for power of her own. She certainly sits there smiling rather smugly. Yes, some of it seems to be to Ramsay, but actually the first look that she gives, a little "I told you so" smile almost, they cut to Jon. So it does seem to suggest that, like, haha, now look at me, I'm saving the day, I've got the power. And I'm not sure how she snuck off also during the whole thing and managed to hook up with Littlefinger and set this all up, but whatever. There she is, watching the battle turn in their favor, all because of her, and seems rather triumphant about it. So it has to, has to go somewhere, that. Spoilers. Well, I guess the big one is probably that Ramsay dies, but I don't think anyone expects Ramsay to survive the series. Rickon, I really don't think he's going to be in any sort of position like that at any point, so I don't really expect him. I mean, I don't know if he's going to survive the whole series. I could definitely see that happening, but I could see it going the other way. But it's not going to happen like this. I don't think we're going to see this sort of battle for Winterfell with Jon involved. I'm dubious of that. So, and you know, Knights of the Vale showing up. So it's all getting very difficult to piece together. They've tied together so many storylines and made such big jumps that you can only glean bits and pieces, which, you know, on the whole is quite good. But I guess we'll see what happens in the final episode of the series. That's, you know, of this season. That's next week. That's the Winds of Winter. And it's going to be the longest episode that they've ever done. So expect quite a lot of things to be going down. Until then.